welcome on stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick roundtable. I'd love to hear no BS stories about what does it take for them to actually be promoted as a senior engineering manager or director of engineering or VP of engineering at Datadog, Sofi, and Slack. So in order to do that, what I'd love to hear is what's your process? What's your mental model? What's the real stories of exceptional engineering leaders that you promoted recently and why? How do you think about it? Help them understand, get into your brain, and how they can get promoted to director of engineering. Make sense? All right, you want to start, Ian?
Definitely.
All right. So what's your process to get someone promoted to director of engineering at Datadog, and tell us one or two real-life stories?
Yes, so generally Datadog is a pretty old school company. We had a review panel. You're sort of taking a lot of peer feedback. So generally the first thing I'm looking for is the amount of scope someone has and the seniority of their managers. So that's sort of the minimum bar. Then once that seems to be in a pretty good place, what I'm really trying to seek is, does everyone agree that this person is actually ready? So I'm seeking a lot of peer approval, peer feedback ahead of time, and I'm basically giving that to the person and seeing how they deal with it. All of us have our strengths and weaknesses. Generally, we want to emphasize our strengths in the promotion process and say, oh, but don't look too hard at my weakness. A lot of times what's keeping people back is just getting their weaknesses to a point that they're good enough to get to the next level. So that tends to be how I approach it. It's generally, I'd say for most people, it's like a 12-month process between sort of having the scope ready and the promotion actually happening.
So you are managing 700 engineers at Datadog, right?
At Datadog, I was 700.
So it's probably 10 or 20 director or VP that you promoted at this time.
Yeah, it was probably 10 directors. I think 2 VPs happened in my time. Of course, VPs sort of managing 100, so it's sort of a bit rarer. But yeah, it was, everyone's case tends to be different. Some people are often they're superstar, on top of all details, hiring great people, and sometimes their scope just isn't big enough yet. You're trying to find scope for them. Sometimes it's that people actually have stuff to work on, and that's sometimes the more difficult one, but actually once you come out the other side, the more rewarding one when you've coached them to grow.
Tell us one story of a director that you promoted recently and why them. Did they do things by the book or did they do things differently, controversially?
Yeah, actually, so this guy actually got promoted right after I left, but it was in process. So this was our senior director of our runtime platforms, basically Kubernetes public cloud. He wasn't a by-the-book guy, so he was scrappy, get stuff done, sort of loved actually by the executive team because he would just, was a large part to how he kept expanding. But honestly, on the actual nuts and bolts of management, not that good. His team was often, 50% done on getting the reviews done on time. So I wasn't managing him, I was 2 levels up. But it was a lot of one-on-ones where I was like, look, you have to get on top of this. I know this isn't, you don't see this quite as important as keeping the business growing. You get lots of positive feedback about keeping the business growing. But if I can't point to you as someone who has their management actually in place, then that's a problem. So he worked on it. It definitely wasn't quick for him. It definitely was, but again, right after I left, actually, he got promoted.
Okay, so your advice is don't get things by the book, don't do the performance review, get the business growing. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say everyone is different. If you're a not by the book person, then you have to work out how do you cover for the by the book stuff. If you're a by the book person, sometimes you have to work out how to be scrappy and show that you're not just a by the book. So I think everyone's a little bit different.
Yeah, okay. Jeremy, you are CTO of Sofi. You're managing almost 2,000 engineers there. Before that, you were SVP of engineering at Splunk, VP of DoorDash, and VP at Twitter. You probably have seen 50 to 100 director or VP that you promoted in your career. Tell us one or two stories that really stand out and why them, what's controversial things that they did that they can learn from.
Sure, thanks, Kwang. I think one thing for me, actually, sort of thinking a little bit about what Ian said is, I don't actually look for everybody to agree when we're hiring somebody, for that matter, or when we're promoting somebody. Obviously, input from a lot of different people is really important to sort of draw out characteristics. I think at the director level, I think in terms of what's different to be successful as a manager to a director, or even senior manager to director, or then from director to VP. Director level for me sits at this kind of magical inflection point where the best directors really understand the day-to-day of what's happening on their teams, and they understand the kind of pain points, what's working, what's not. They typically can really get to know everybody on the team well, but they also are at enough of an altitude level to understand what's happening in the business overall, or the sort of product space that they're working in. And that inflection point is really critical from a leadership perspective because it helps people that are in more senior leadership roles be connected to what's going on the ground, while at the same time it helps connect engineers and managers working down at the team level to sort of the bigger strategy. So in promoting directors, one of the things to look for is sort of people who can do that, who have sort of shown evidence of being able to do that through their impact and leadership on individual teams or even sort of a combination of teams. The second is at the director level, managing other managers becomes really important. And so, I mean, often, but not always, I think people that I've seen get promoted to director in my organizations have had some time managing other managers as in a senior manager role, but sometimes it's actually not the case. You have to kind of take a little bit of a prediction as to sort of how they'll do doing that as a director. What's different, I would tell people, as they sort of get promoted to director, it's both easier and harder. On the one hand, now you're managing people who have sort of the same job as you, so that's actually easier sometimes for people than transitioning from being a senior IC to being a manager. The flip side of that is you realize you're one step further removed, which feels like 10 times further removed from the sort of the day-to-day of actually doing engineering, and that can be very uncomfortable for people. And so sort of thinking about somebody's readiness to do that becomes part of promotion. And then finally, kind of hiring and team development, all the things that go into that growth are sort of super critical. In terms of stories I can think of, we had, I think back within the last year, sort of one of the engineering leaders that got promoted to director at Sofi was in our kind of lending product group, so sort of builds all the products around our different lending businesses. And, typical sort of for directors, they show just this combination of, really strong results. One, they had really done a lot of work to develop people on their team, including both junior engineers and some of the more senior engineers on the team, and kind of helping them be ready for the next level of impact. Those engineers were showing impact beyond the immediate work that they had to do, which is fantastic and kind of shows some great leadership on the part of this manager who ended up getting promoted. And they were able to deliver not just the kind of direct results that were sort of the top priorities of just the teams under their responsibility, but they were able to kind of create leverage through the work that they were doing across broader parts of the business. You see that combination of things together, and then you get kind of 360 feedback from people that talks about how well they work, upholding the values of the company, being an addition to the culture of the company. Like, these are the ingredients that make it sort of really easy to say, yes, great, well, let's promote this person. Okay,
I have many questions about things you said, which is very hard to do, but I think this is why it's hard to get my director. But let's switch to Rukmini. Now you are SVP of Engineering at Slack. You were also one of the first mentors in the Plato community, so thank you very much for this. And you were a speaker at every single conference that we have so far, so thank you for doing this too. So yeah, tell us more about your team today and what's your mental process to get someone here to get promoted as a director at Slack?
Yeah, so at Slack, we actually have very clearly defined career paths, which write down our expectations. Different axes we measure are team health, really important. Do you have a healthy team? Execution, I think, is everything at a director level. Like, I should trust you to execute complex initiatives. And finally, technical impact. All of this boils down to business impact that you're having. I love what you said about directors. I think it's that inflection point where you really have to go hands off. I like to see directors who are, because it's the first time you start to build the influence muscle as much as doing everything yourself. You'll realize very quickly it's so much easier to do or be the person like to tell people to do than having to have another level. So managing managers is required. So directing, I think the role has it described that well. And our promo process is quite simple. Like, we write packets with evidence in them, and then we review those packets in a peer group. And what we like to see is clear examples on the different axes we measured. And most importantly is, I cannot stress this enough, sustained impact. So it's just because you started doing that job last month, I'm not going to promote you. I'm just not going to do it. Because I want to make sure you're able to sustain that level of impact at the next level for about 12 months minimum if it's a director. So if I think about it, if you're up for promo, you're someone who's up and coming in my org, I most likely want to see you do the job for a whole year before you're going to get promoted. That's just no BS. Like, that's the reality. If anybody else is telling you otherwise, that's not how it works.
I love it. There's one question for you, Jeremy. You said when you become a director, you become far removed from what's happening on day-to-day, but also the best engineering leaders know everything that's happening in the field. So how do you balance this and how you do that? Tell us how the best director in your team are doing it.
So I think the way the best directors I've seen do it is they've they're able to sort of maintain a relationship and connection to every engineer on the team. And not just engineers for that matter. I know this is sort of engineering conference, but the product managers, the designers, researchers, sort of whoever are the sort of cross-functional collection working. They're able to maintain that connection and understand what's working and what's not, how things are progressing, where there might be new opportunities, where there's gaps on the team. But they're able to do that without feeling like they have to steer everything themselves sort of day to day.
Okay.
You know, they're just not in stand-ups the same way that they are maybe when they're sort of a manager of a team or even before that when they were a senior IC most likely. And so sort of maintaining that relationship. I mean, the way they do it through skip level sort of conversations. Do it when we were all working in offices together, which, you know, maybe for some of you is back to being a reality. You know, they're able to do it through, you know, sidebar conversations, kind of talking to people sort of in the hallways, sessions in front of a whiteboard. I'm a big believer, product development is a team sport. I'm a big believer getting people in together to sort of work through kind of challenges and problems, and so they're sort of participating in that. And in doing that, they can kind of maintain a deep awareness of what's happening and understand the issues without having to be the one who's taking the action all the time to kind of do the thing.
Jeremy said a couple of things. Now I love, because we are in an OBS conference, I love you to tell me one thing that you think it's true, but it might be controversial for the two others, if you see what I mean. So this is what I think, and I think that you are going to disagree with me. Is there anything that comes to mind? And I have
what
one
would
for
I say?
you.
Well, I love the sustained impact point. I would say for me, kind of 6 months is the minimum threshold, not a year, but probably more commonly it is longer. So I would at least, you know, but I would say I've seen plenty of examples of people that have been promoted after 6 months or so of like, oh wow, they're really performing in that. I think another no BS thing is it's pretty common that like the absolute best promotion packets, and actually a pretty good fraction of those that end up being really successful sort of right away, are just no-brainers. Like by the time, and maybe it gets to the sort of the sustained impact, you sort of see the information together in the packet on the page or from the notes of people, and you're like, wow, I can't believe this person's not already a director. Like that's the no BS. Like you're there when everybody's like, oh, I thought you were that level already. Oh my gosh, like we'll document it all, but like we're definitely promoting you.
I think, Ian, you were saying when we were preparing for this that you don't really believe in continuous feedback or continuous performance assessment, but more like once a year, very thorough assessment with a lot of feedback and a lot of data. And I think this is going against the continuous feedback cycle that we heard from many other companies. Tell us more about this.
I mean, my experience of managing managers is I maybe have 2 hours a week in meetings with you. And I'm in a bunch of other sort of meetings where your organization is coming up, but I'm not getting that much information at any single point in time. So I sort of have this sort of no surprises philosophy, how I work with my managers. Like it's up to you to make sure I'm never surprised, knowing that occasionally misses will happen. But what I find then with that is, so across the course of one-on-ones, which I'm very regular at, we're talking about your performance, but very slightly. Like it's just, hey, you were supposed to do this. Did you actually do it? Then I do the old school traditional sort of big fang style. I sit down and I'll write, like I'll go to like 10 people, I'll do surveys of your team, and I'll sit down and really try and internalize everything that's happened in the last year. How do I turn that into a growth story for you? And I just find that that's so much work, and it's so different to the continuous thing so basically you could say, I believe in continuous, but continuous is extremely shallow and more or less like, are you on top of what's happening in your role? And that's what we're talking about every sort of one-on-one. Like my job isn't to do your job, it's to help when your org is having issues. So this is where like the people who are going deeper continuous feedback, I'm just not sure I'd ever have time to do it well. But maybe tools would help me. So
Maybe a co-pilot. Rukmini, you were smiling. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
I think I do in a way, because I think it just, again, depends on the inflection point in your career as you get to director, senior director. Like people who recently get promoted to VP always tell me like, I don't hear feedback anymore. I'm like, stop craving for feedback. The fact that you're here is you're doing a good job. Because after a certain level, like you won't hear it. You'll only hear the things that don't work. Like you're expected to manage your organization. You're expected to do your work. You're expected to stay. You're performing at the highest level. So that's an interesting thing that I've noticed, like as I've grown engineering leaders, at a certain point they're like, but Rukmini, where's the feedback? I'm like, you're here, right? Like, good job, like I guess, right? I don't get many pats on my back, that's what I'm saying.
It's not something I hear a lot. Do you agree, Jeremy? Stop looking for feedback. The fact you're here, it's because you're doing a good job.
I mean, you can solicit it, but you're just going to get less feedback as you get to
Of course.
higher levels, for sure. And a way to still embrace getting better at your job every day is to cultivate your own ways of figuring out how you're doing. Like, for example, at Sofi, I brought in an executive coach that works with me and all of my direct reports one-on-one, and he works with us as a team. And he's met with dozens of other senior leaders, including my peers, sort of across the executive team at Sofi and all that. And he's a fantastic asset for us to sort of understand how we're doing, how I'm doing in my job, how the team's doing. So you have to sort of cultivate your own mechanisms a lot of the time as you get to be more senior. The one thing I would say about sort of continuous and surprises is the first time you hear a piece of information you didn't expect, it's a surprise. And so this idea that no surprises means you're never going to hear something that's like uncomfortable is like not what it means. What it means is you want to make routine the idea that you're having conversations about like things that matter. The news could be good, the news could be bad, the observation could be great, it could be a challenge, whatever. But like, I think I see some people sort of react uncomfortably, and actually managers or even more senior don't like to deliver uncomfortable news because they know it's going to be uncomfortable when they first deliver it. I'm like, look, no matter what, when you like convey something that's uncomfortable, it's going to be uncomfortable. You have to get used to that and sort of learn how to do it. But you can just make it more routine.
One thing you said, and I'd love to hear from Rukmini and you, Ian, about you don't need to agree with me. I think you said that, right? So if you want to get promoted, you don't need to agree with me. So tell me a story where someone didn't agree with you, you actually promoted them, and someone didn't agree with you, fired them, or I don't know if it's true, but if you can think about when it's a good time to disagree, when it's a good time to just move forward, tell us the balance.
So I need to ask, you mean when someone disagreed with me, or like I thought they should have made a different decision, probably a big decision, they made a different one?
So actually, Jeremy said that one of the best thing in some director of engineering do is that disagree with me, and they really move forward on in the direction. So do you agree with that too, and
Totally.
to what extent?
I mean, again, everyone's going to have their own strengths, and a lot of the time you're going to presume to know what someone's job should be, and being a good leader is, of course, not putting it on them and not even do that. But sometimes you also know good leaders need freedom. So a good example, I guess I had a director of data engineering who was very opinionated. He was, ex-Spotify, the heavily process, very opinionated on wanting to do process a certain way, which was different, or OKR. I sort of said, look, I disagree with you, but you're a director. I'm going to let you do that. He put it in front of the CEO. The CEO loved it, actually. And so when we put together his promotion later on, he was like, look, this is the type of thing that actually proactive, true leadership, willing to take something where you disagreed with and get it done was the right thing. So that was an example. Not a massive, like again, if you're strategically misaligned, there's sort of this question. But this was something where, I thought it wasn't going to work, and honestly, it worked.
Any example, Rukmini?
I can tell you where it doesn't work on the strategy part. It's really hard. Like,
yeah.
if you disagree with like product vision and strategy, and you're openly like dissing it with the rest of the team, it's really hard. My feedback always is like disagree but commit. Like you can come and escalate up to me, complain to me all you want. Don't let your team and your organization feel it. Like if you need an avenue, come to us, but don't. Like that's been really hard. I've had to manage people out where at some point it's like they don't disagree and they just can't get over. And sometimes it becomes exhausting, like to manage the same conversation over and over again. I think we talk about it, it's like the cost of alignment. And if the cost of alignment is too high, I think it's the best interest of the person and the organization that you part ways, because it just becomes almost an impossible task, and everyone's walking around eggshells around you, and then it's just super uncomfortable. So it's not the same where, disagreeing.
So what I hear is more like the strategic stuff. It's fine to discuss, but at some point we have to move forward, and you disagree and commit, or I disagree and commit. But for the tactical stuff, for the process stuff, maybe it's fine to just let it go. Is that also how you feel, Jeremy, or how do you feel about that?
For sure. I actually think the sort of inverse can be a real challenge as well, where you sort of don't get people to think critically enough, especially about the work of their own team. I think the very best directors, and for sure at the VP level, they have to be able to sort of step outside the ownership of the thing that their teams are responsible for, and actually think critically about what's working and what's not. And think about sort of what's happening contextually around the rest of the company or what have you. And it just sort of happens often that people just won't challenge their own team or their own work for that matter, and think, okay, this didn't go as well as it could. We need to do this better. This was a challenge. And it comes up in all sorts of processes. It comes up in promotion processes themselves. People aren't critical enough. Critical doesn't mean that the person's not ready for promotion. It means really trying to explore, like, what are the strengths, what are the gaps, like, what are the risks, what are the things. Same thing in hiring. Sort of getting people to really engage that kind of critical thinking can be difficult.
I'd like to finish with one tip or one real thing that you did or one of your director did in order to just be a better leader. I think, Rukmini, you mentioned something really cool. It's super simple, but super powerful. Maybe you want to start so that you can let Ian and Jeremy think about it.
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to Dave, who's no longer in my team. But he had this workflow. It's like a really simple Slack workflow. And it was literally like called Friday Fives. And it sent a DM to his direct saying, 3 things you did great this week and 2 things I want you to think about. And it was really simple, very low lift. But it was like a really good way to encourage people that your career is always going to be like things that you're really good at, which you're crushing right now, but things that you need to stretch and grow. And it's always going to be a balance. But what that created was like a continuous feedback of like, it might be shallow, but I think it's important. And the best part is like they didn't have to like do any extra work to document. It was almost became a part of their nature, and their team really loved it. They like always told me how delightful. They used to like write funny messages, do Friday memes, and people look forward to it. And always said this is an open dialogue, so I want you to like talk to me about this. So it kept the dialogue going, which I think is really cool.
Nice. Are you doing it now or not?
Me?
Yes.
No, I wish I was. I'm sorry, I'm not.
Hard. Yeah. Jeremy, anything?
Well, I'll give you 2 things. One I did right when I got to Sofi, and one that I'm trying to do now that's recent. When I first got to Sofi, I just eliminated like half of the hours of recurring meetings sort of on the schedule. I just like, we're spending way too much time talking to each other about stuff that could be done in much less time. Like, let's just nuke half of this and all the sort of documents that went with it and just sort of distill it to sort of more important things. What I'm trying to do now is I realize we're just in an this combination of ambition that we have, this sort of challenge of executing on the things we're trying to execute on, and the macro environment that we're in sort of just creates a tremendous amount of pressure for everybody. And so what I'm trying to do now is say out loud to people all the time, like, I believe that you can do the thing. Like, I believe that you personally can actually accomplish these sort of difficult things that we have. And just sort of reinforcing that message explicitly with people, I think, is a very powerful leadership method.
Got it. One last thing for you, Ian. One thing they should do tomorrow?
I mean, the one that definitely is sort of director, so this is less someone did, more when I brought in. So it's sort of fortnightly wins and challenges, this idea that you are pretty rigorous at making your management sort of write up 4 points for a general audience, what they've ever done. That was something I took from a manager I had and brought to Datadog. It doesn't scale to large orgs, honestly. But honestly, when you have about 100 to 200 people, it's a great way of making sure that all the pertinent information everyone's seeing every week. It's a far better cadence flow of information than quarterly OKRs or weekly scrums, I found. There's plenty of blog posts about it, but that was a nice mechanism that really fostered communication.
Awesome. That were hopefully some good no BS stories and advice. Continuous feedback or not continuous feedback, pick your battle. Do not agree with me, but sometimes kind of good to just move forward and disagree and commit. Understand everything in your team, but once you become a director, it's harder because you are one step removed from the field. And sustain impact, which is the right thing to do in order for you to, it's become just obvious that you need to be promoted, but that's the hardest part, how to do that. Thanks for your time, for your feedback, for your advice, for them. Hopefully you find them useful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.